They left her alone, 7 months pregnant, in a hut without a door in the Chiapas Sierra, and they did it on a Tuesday as if it were just a piece of paperwork. This is the story of Marcela Solis, a woman who arrived at a broken place and found inside it exactly what she needed to rebuild herself. Welcome. If this story touches your heart, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments what part of Mexico or where in the world you're watching from. There are betrayals that don't arrive with shouting. They come slowly, disguised as promises that get kept backwards, until one day you turn around and there's nothing left where everything used to be. Marcela understood this at 29 years old, when her husband Heriberto packed his things one Saturday, said he was going into town for an errand, and didn't come back. Not that night. Not the next. Not ever. It was the sister-in-law who spoke 3 days later, with that administrative cruelty that is worse than insults because it comes wrapped in calm. He left with Fernanda. They've been together for a while. I thought you knew. She didn't think that. She said it because she wanted the pain to be tidy. Marcela had a 7-month belly, 112 pesos in her apron pocket, and the certainty that in that house, Heriberto's family's house where they had lived since they married, there was no longer a place for her. The mother-in-law confirmed it that same afternoon without going around in circles. You can't stay here, Marcela. This house belongs to my son. She didn't give her time to gather everything. She put what she could into 2 sacks: clothes, her documents, the dark green shawl that had been her grandmother's, and that still smelled, if you put it on and closed your eyes, of copal and cornfield earth. She left the rest because there was no way to carry it alone with that belly, and because deep down she knew that the things that matter don't fit in sacks. A distant cousin, a man of few words and no cruelty, told her there was a hut in the Sierra that had belonged to her Aunt Guadalupe, now dead, and that no one had claimed. He wrote the directions on a piece of paper and lent her the bus money, without asking her to return it quickly. The hut was 2 hours from the nearest town, up a dirt path that climbed between pines and ferns and low mist. When Marcela arrived, the sun was already setting and the cold of Chiapas was beginning to come down from the Sierra, with that determination cold has when it knows there is no one to stop it. There was no door, just the wooden frame and the empty space, and inside the darkness and the smell of closed-up rooms. And time held still. The adobe walls were still standing. The tin roof had 2 holes, but held. The stone hearth in the corner was intact, with old ash still inside, as if Aunt Guadalupe had used it not so long ago and had simply stepped out for a moment and not come back. Marcela set the sacks on the floor, sat on them because there was nothing else to sit on, placed her hands on her belly, and breathed in the cold air of the Sierra. The baby moved inside her. Once, hard, as if reminding her that there was someone there who still needed her to stand up. She stood up. She found firewood stacked against the outer wall, covered with a piece of tarp. She lit the hearth with the matches she had in her bag. She heated water in the only pot in the hut, a large black clay one hanging from a nail as if someone had left it there on purpose, and made herself a tea with some herbs she recognized growing along the wall. Herba Santa, wild mint. She drank it slowly, standing beside the hearth, looking at the space where the door should have been, and the Chiapas sky that was now completely black and completely full of stars. That night she slept wrapped in the green shawl on top of the sacks, with the fire going, and she didn't dream of Heriberto, or the sister-in-law, or anything that hurt. She dreamed of water running over stones, which is the dream people sometimes have when they're beginning something without knowing it yet. At dawn the man arrived. He came up the path with an axe in his hand and the expression of someone who had expected to find the hut empty. He stopped when he saw the smoke coming out of the holes in the roof, and Marcela standing in the doorway with the green shawl and the 7-month belly, and the eyes that didn't ask for permission. His name was Geronimo Vasquez. He was 34 years old and had been living on a plot of land on the other side of the hill for 2 years, ever since his wife died of fever and he decided he needed a place where silence was a choice and not an absence. He had been looking after Aunt Guadalupe's hut from a distance. For no particular reason, he said, except that it seemed wrong to let useful things deteriorate on their own. I didn't know anyone was coming, he said. Neither did I, said Marcela. Geronimo didn't ask anything more that day. He measured the doorway with his arms, left, and came back at midday with wooden planks and tools. He built a simple door, with no decoration that closed with a bolt from the inside. When he finished, Marcella offered him tea, and he accepted. They sat together on the new threshold with the jugs in their hands and looked at the tallest pine on the hill moving slowly with the wind. "What are you going to do here?" he finally asked. "Stay," said Marcella, "at least until the baby is born." Geronimo nodded, as if that were enough information. He came back the next day with a folding cot he had to spare. The day after, with a chair. He never announced that he would return. He simply returned, with something or with nothing, and stayed for just the right amount of time and left before his presence could be misinterpreted or weigh on her. Marcella learned to recognize his footsteps on the path and to put water on to heat when she heard them, which was the only way she knew how to tell him he was welcome. It was in the second week when Marcella found the little box. It was beneath a loose board in the floor in the darkest corner of the hut beside the hearth. The board moved when Marcella stepped on it a certain way, and when she bent down to see what was there, she saw first the edge of dark wood, and then the whole box the size of a thick book, with a lid that closed with a little hook of hand-bent wire. Inside were folded papers written in small, tight handwriting that took Marcella a moment to decipher. They weren't letters. They were recipes. Cooking recipes, yes, but not common ones. They were preparations Marcella had never seen written down, even though she recognized them immediately because her own grandmother had made them and had never taught them to anyone. The Sierra mole with more than 30 ingredients noted with their exact proportions. The Chillicothe preserve with raw cane sugar and cinnamon that lasts for months without refrigeration. The blue corn atoll with cacao that in the villages of Chiapas is only made for wakes and baptisms, and that no one knew how to prepare the same way anymore. And beneath the papers with recipes, folded in four, a document what Marcella was about to discover, neither of them had imagined. It was a property title for the hut and the plot of land surrounding it, half a hectare of land with fruit trees and a natural spring, in the name of Guadalupe Solis Ramos, and at the bottom a handwritten note that said, "To whoever comes from the family and needs it." G. Marcella read her aunt's name. She read the surname, then she read her own, Solis, and stayed looking at the paper for a moment without moving. She called Geronimo. He came with his usual calm and read the document once, then again. Then he said, without drama, "This is a valid title. It has the seal of the Agrarian Registry. Does that mean it's mine? It means that if you're family of Guadalupe Solis, the law says yes." Marcella thought about the cousin who had given her the directions written on a piece of paper. She thought about how he too was a Solis, from her mother's same line. She thought about how Aunt Guadalupe had died without children, and with enough clarity to write that note at the bottom of a title and put it in a little box beneath the floor, where only someone who really lived there would find it. Something inside her sat down for the first time in a long while. Heriberto's family found out in 3 different ways on the same day, which is the speed at which news travels when it touches land and money. The mother-in-law sent word through a neighbor that the hut didn't belong to the Solis family, but to the Arguar family who had owned the land before, that there was a boundary dispute, that Marcella would do well not to involve any lawyer, because that would complicate things for everyone. Heriberto himself came 2 days later, which Marcella didn't expect. He came without Fernanda, in his good day clothes, with an expression that was trying to seem reasonable. He came up to the new door, the door Geronimo had built, and stopped because Marcella didn't open it all the way. "We need to talk," said Heriberto. "Talk. That thing you found, it needs to be looked at properly. My mother says that land has a history, that it's not so simple." Heriberto changed his tone. He moved into the one of reproaches, the one she knew well. "Marcella, you're going to have a son, alone in a hut in the Sierra. Is that what you want for him?" Marcella looked at him for a moment. Then she said in a completely still voice, "You don't get to tell me what I want for my son." Geronimo appeared at that moment along the path, with firewood stacked in his arms, and without breaking his pace, he looked at Heriberto without saying anything. He set the firewood down by the hearth, went out again and sat on the large stone in front, fixing the handle of a tool, as if he had always intended to do that there. Heriberto looked at Geronimo. He looked at Marcella. "I didn't come to fight," he said at last. "I know," said Marcella. "That's why you're not coming in." He went back down the path without saying more. The mother-in-law didn't send word again. The matter of the boundaries never reached any lawyer because there were no boundaries to dispute. The title was clear, the seal was legitimate, and Marcella's surname was in the same line as Aunt Guadalupe's. What remained was the little box, the land, the natural spring, and the recipes. Geronimo was the first to taste the blue corn atole with cacao one cold morning when Marcella prepared it following Aunt Guadalupe's small handwriting. He drank it slowly, standing by the hearth without saying anything for a moment. Then he said, "I hadn't had anything like this since I was a child. Did your mother make it?" "My grandmother." "At baptisms." He paused. "Where does the recipe come from?" "From the little box." Geronimo looked at the box on the table as if seeing it in a new way. "There are people in the village," he said slowly, "who would pay for this at a celebration. For the mole, too. Doña Crucita has been looking for years for someone who knows how to make the real Sierra mole." Marcella looked at him. He looked at her. Neither said anything more that day, but the idea stayed in the air of the hut the way the smell of cacao stays, not going away entirely, settling into the walls, waiting. The boy was born on a Thursday in March, in the hut, with a midwife from the nearest village who arrived in time because Geronimo had run down the night before to alert her. He was named Aurelio, after the dawn that came in through the two holes in the tin roof at the exact moment he began to breathe. Marcella wrapped him in her grandmother's green shawl and held him against her chest while outside the pines of Chiapas moved slowly in the morning wind. Geronimo waited on the large stone in front without coming in until the midwife stepped out and told him everything was fine. Then he did come in. He stood beside the cot and looked at the boy for a moment, without speaking. "Aurelio," said Marcella. Geronimo nodded. Then he said very quietly, "Welcome." It was the only thing he said, but he said it in the way one says things one has spent a long time thinking about. When the June rains came down and Aunt Guadalupe's plot began to show what the earth of Chiapas does when someone works it, the avocado tree at the back heavy with fruit, the colitas growing on their own beside the natural spring, the cornfield Geronimo had planted on the sunny side rising even in green. Marcella began to go down to the village on Thursdays with the clay jar full of Chillicothe preserve and jars of Sierra mole prepared in 2 days of slow work beside the hearth. Doña Crucita was the first to buy, then her neighbors, then the cook from the market eatery who tasted the mole on a spoon and ordered 4 kilos for Sunday. The recipe box now lived on the table, open, with Aunt Guadalupe's papers inside and Marcella's own notes on new sheets she had sewn to the originals, with thread of the same color she used when she mended the green shawl. Aurelio, when he started to sit up on his own, would reach out his hand toward it with curiosity, and Marcella let him touch the wooden lid but not the pages. Because there are things that have to last for those who come later. One afternoon, Geronimo arrived with planks and spent the afternoon building a shelf beside the hearth, at the exact height where the box would be visible from anywhere in the room, but out of reach of Aurelio's small hands. He didn't say what it was for while he built it. When he finished, Marcella placed the box there, and the two of them looked at it for a moment from the center of the room. "It looks good there," said Marcella. "Yes," said Geronimo. There was something more in that yes, but neither of them named it yet. Things between them were said that way, slowly, without hurrying, like the Sierra of Chiapas, which doesn't give away its colors all at once but reveals them as the mist decides to lift. Sometimes inside someone who seems defeated there is something the pain couldn't reach, a skill held in the body, a surname that opens a door. A little box beneath the floor that was waiting for exactly that person to arrive. Marcella Solis came to a hut without a door, believing she had reached the bottom. And at the bottom she found the recipes of an aunt who had never met her, but who had written her name on a piece of paper and folded it in 4, like someone keeping something for a person who doesn't yet know they're going to need it. Do you think the worst moments can be the beginning of something better? If this story touched something in your heart, leave your comment below. Tell us what part of Mexico or where in the world you're watching from. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss a single story. And share it with someone who is going through a moment they don't yet understand but that may already be the beginning of something better. Until the next story. Hands that know how to do something never arrive anywhere for no reason. Geronimo whispered to Marcella one afternoon while Aurelio slept and the smell of mole filled the entire hut. She didn't answer, but she placed her hand on the wooden box and left it there for a moment, like someone giving thanks for something that doesn't yet have a name.